What is up guys, this is Mr. Ninja Boy and today we're back for yet another Adobe Photoshop tutorial. Today diving deeper into learning fundamental design basics of Photoshop. Taking off where we left off last time, continuing from our part 2 of Photoshop basics. Today, this tutorial will be centered around creating eye-catching and captivating thumbnail designs, intended for use for YouTube videos. But these techniques I'll be showing you guys today can of course be applied to various different applicable uses in your graphic work. If you haven't seen some of my previous Photoshop tutorials covering the basics and getting you started into graphic design, I will leave a link down below in the description for the Photoshop tutorial playlist. Now before we get started, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Storyblocks, who sponsored this video today. With Storyblocks, you can get all the stock images you can imagine, including high quality photos, vectors, icons, templates, and more. This is absolutely huge for graphic designers like myself and you guys. And you can download anything from 400,000 images in their member library and save 60% on marketplace content. All these images are of course royalty free, which in the professional world of design is of course vital. So this inevitably can be a great resource for all of you guys. Storyblocks is giving away 7 free days of membership so you can try it out and access a massive variety of high-res photos, vectors, and more. I will leave a link down below in the description to Storyblocks so you can start downloading and get started today. Alright guys, so now we are in the tutorial section of this video, of course, where basically we're just going to dive right in and I'm going to show you guys how I personally make my thumbnails for my YouTube videos. Now of course, all the skill set that I'm going to teach you guys today can be applicable to a bunch of different types of graphic work. You aren't necessarily only restricted to making thumbnails specifically. With what I'm going to teach you today, but a lot of the skills are going to be very useful for a lot of the graphic work that you guys are going to do. So first of all, before we get started, I just wanted to show you guys what I prepared here as a thumbnail template package, which might come in pretty handy for you guys. Basically, I'm just going to link it down below in my website. You can probably buy this for a couple dollars. I'll probably put it up for like $5 because obviously I am giving away like the full source of what I personally use, like the lighting presets, the shapes, emojis and stuff like that. I'm gonna add a bunch of more folders. Like emojis, for example, is just like additions you can add to your thumbnails, of course. Like for example, if you want this crying, laughing thumbnail, I just basically have a nice PNG cutout of it. You can do whatever you want with it. They're basically just everything prepared for you so you can make thumbnails really quickly and easily. For example, title presets. I have a lot of different title styles that you guys can basically use, and yeah, a bunch of things like that, like backgrounds, like Gaussian backgrounds, polygonal. A bunch of different types of things you can use for your thumbnails, so I will link that down below if you guys are interested. This is basically what I personally have created for myself to make my own thumbnail. So if you guys want the full source, the Photoshop file to that, then of course check the link down below to my website and you can check that out. Anyways, so now let's actually get into the tutorial part of this video finally, and I'm gonna start by creating a new document. So we're gonna go to File, New, and just as we create any other document, this time we're going to go with the dimensions of 1920 by 1080 because this dimension is actually going to come in perfectly for creating the right scale factor for the thumbnail, the ratio rather. We can of course scale down, but 1920 by 1080 I feel like is the best for basically conserving quality and having the crispest looking thumbnails with the right size. So we're gonna go with 1920 by 1080 with 300 ppi with 300 ppi pixels per inch. Basically, that everything looks good. So we're gonna go with all these settings here, no advanced options or anything, and we're gonna press create. So as you guys can see here, we are introduced with this new document with this blank layer as we learned in the basics tutorial. And again, if you guys haven't watched that, then I will link that down below as well. I do recommend if you are brand new to Photoshop that you go through my beginner tutorials. They're actually quite in depth and get you started pretty well. So first thing we're gonna do is unlock this layer. Just double click on that, or just click once on that lock icon. And now we have unlocked the layer itself. We're just gonna make it invisible for now and delete it later. So first things first, what we are actually going to focus around is creating a background. Now, one of the methods we can actually create a background is actually using just a gradient with a rectangle. So we clicked on the rectangle tool and we are just creating a rectangle here. As you guys learned in the basics tutorial, it's quite an easy thing to do. Just go on the rectangle tool. If it's selected on something else like a custom shape tool, whatever it is, just right click on that and then just click on rectangle tool. And once we have that, just click and drag across your screen. It doesn't matter if it's going over the dimensions of the project itself a bit. That's quite irrelevant, because once we click away from it, it is cut out, and basically it doesn't really matter. We can have a rectangle a lot bigger than the actual thing, but it'll only be cut out to the shape, if that makes sense. So, or the dimensions rather. So let's undo the new rectangle we just made, and we'll just mess with this one. So now we have rectangle 1 here. What we are gonna do is, or actually now that I think about it, it sort of does matter, because the gradient that we will do when we go to FX and then blending options, when we go to gradient style, gradient overlay rather, it will sort of overflow, and it'll maybe cut it off a bit. So what we are gonna do is actually perfect the rectangle that we made and make it actually the exact size of 1920 by 1080. So we're gonna go Control T on the rectangle and just drag it in, and it will auto lock once you have hit like the all the way on the outside of the document. So we have it fully aligned up with the 1920 by 1080 document, no greater nor less. So it looks good. Now what we are going to do is go to FX and then blending options, and we are going to go on gradient overlay. Now what I did here is I already made a nice gradient here to get us started with our thumbnail. And I'm just going to show you guys this gradient overlay that I did here. So basically all I did was add 3 points here, with the bottom point being a darker, and let's actually make this a bit darker. So we started off with this is sort of a green. If you guys want to do a different type of a gradient, you can of course do that, but I went with a green here. So we're going with a darker green here, and then in the middle we have a lighter green, and then slowly working our way up to not quite a white, but more of a greenish white tint all the way at the top. What you always want to think of thumbnails, all the way at the top is where you want your main lighting shining down on the thumbnail itself, and the bottom is usually where the darker colors are focused around, just around here. Now, of course, you can do your different variations of this, but this is what I personally this is my sort of method, how I personally think when I am making a thumbnail. So if you guys want to do different colors, or even get started and you don't know how, you can of course, for example, select this, the first preset, and as you guys can see here, we are basically, with this preset, we have just a black, and then all the way fading up to a white, just 2 different points. If you guys want another point, you can just click there, and then as you guys can see, now we have 3 points. You can do 4 points, etc. And if you guys want to change color, just double click on one of the little colors there, and let's say we want like a reddish thumbnail, or a background rather. We go, or let's maybe like an orange. I sort of do like this color for thumbnails, and then we go there, and then let's say we want to gradually make it a lighter variation of that color. We can of course make that lighter, and then gradually go up again, maybe yeah, something like that, and then all the way up to white. Now that doesn't look too bad, but what we are gonna do is actually just stick with the green. I'm just basically showing you guys the method of how I made this. A very simple gradient. So we're gonna stick with this and press OK. And yeah, this is basically one method. I'm going to show you guys some other methods, how to use actual images later on, and create your backgrounds for your thumbnails using those. But for now, this is definitely great. So what we are going to do is mess around with some text. And so first of all, let's pick the text tool and then click anywhere on the screen, or rather on the document, and let's type our text. So we're going to call it example. So let's actually make it all caps. Just with this font, all caps looks the best. So if you guys are wondering what this font is, I will leave a link down below if you guys want to download it. It's called SF Collegiate, if I am not mistaken. It's a very nice font for thumbnails. We usually use this for a lot of my thumbnails. It's nice and bold, and I like the little slant and then the text type of style to it. So anyways, now let's actually mess with making this stand out. Now, what you want to think of, let's say you have a title up at the top here, and then, as I said earlier, you want the lighting to be more so at the top. And with that, you usually have lighter colors at the top. Now, what that means is that you either want dark text or you want bright text that is similar to the color up here, but you want it to stand out with a backdrop. And I'm going to show you guys the first method. Now, what I personally would advise against is to have, like, let's say black text up here. Now, what you want to always think about is how this thumbnail is going to look when it is a smaller size. So down here, if you want to preview it, because we are, of course, on YouTube, you aren't going to see thumbnails this blown up. You aren't going to see all the details. You want to think about when making this to make it as bright, as vibrant, and as visible as possible, all the important contents, and as visible as possible for you to see in smaller sizes on different devices, like on mobile, on the desktop, etc. When you're browsing on your YouTube home, you aren't really viewing it as 1920 by 1080. I don't know the exact dimensions. It matters, of course, on your screen resolution and whatnot, but you are, of course, seeing it at much smaller sizes. So down here, we are going to go to, let's say, 20%, view the document at 20%. That's still quite big. So let's even go 10%. I think that's a realistic, that's about a realistic measurement for looking at, for previewing it in Photoshop, for about the size we're going to be looking at it in YouTube. So you basically want to think about how do you make it as eye-catching as possible in small sizes. So from here, as you guys can see, a black sort of text I personally would advise against. And I'll show you guys why, because actually, let me duplicate this and I will show you guys the two different methods of making text and the way you think about it. So it's completely different. We're going to go duplicate layer just so we have two of these, and then move this example text down here. And I'm going to make a black one and then a white one with a black shadow and a sort of focal point to the bright color. So let's go back to 100%, and we will now edit the copy of the example text we just made. So let's remove the black color overlay, and actually this time we're going to go with a gradient. So what we are going to do in this gradient is going to be a little interesting. So we are going to go with a, let's not go with an alpha. So let's go with a normal solid color with a darker gray at the bottom. And then we'll go all the way up to a white at the top. I like that. Now, or rather, let's actually just go a solid white. I kind of do like that. What we are going to do now is going to go drop shadow. Now, as you guys can see, just with the drop shadow, let me just keep it like that for now. And let's go back to the 10% view. As you guys can see, the white with the black drop shadow stands out a lot more than just the black itself. It is subjective, but to my eyes, it definitely works a lot better, and it's proven with a lot of my thumbnails. This is sort of my method, and I mean, a lot of people have seen or I've always asked like how I do my thumbnails and this and that. And this is partly why I'm doing this tutorial, because this is a lot of things I learned after doing YouTube for a couple of years. You know, these methods of graphic design for basically attracting people to your videos. You always want to learn the best ways to do things. And I feel like basically thinking of it this way, a brighter text with a darker backdrop to make it stand out is definitely the best method. So we're actually just going to get rid of the black text itself and just work with this idea. So let's bring this back to the top here, and alright, so now we're basically going to mess around with this text to make it stand out as much as possible. Well, one thing we can do is, of course, bring up the opacity, but if we go all the way up, that kind of does look a little too intense to me. So let's maybe go like 80%. I don't mind how that looks. And if we bring up the spread a bit, that's sort of what we want to focus on, because the spread will basically condense the shadow, the drop shadow, in the areas we want it to. And then let's say we bring up the size a bit to make the spread, or not the spread, the size, basically making the shadow reach out a bit more. And then let's bring up, basically experiment until we think we have this right. We don't want it too intense. I think I kind of do like how this is looking right now. So once we have that, we can of course go with, let's say, a stroke, and then have this be like a darker color. And if let's say we have like a full black on that. And then I kind of do like how that looks, because it sort of adds two types of it kind of adds contrast to it, because of course the white and black, and then the black sort of the grayish drop shadow. Now let's say we view this at 10% again. As you guys can see, I personally think that stands out very well. Now, what you want to do with text is you never want to just have a plain text, just 2D text with no sort of creativity to it. Now, one thing we can do to the transform itself is sort of add a 3D illusion to it. So what we are going to do with the text, actually before we do that, let's actually just make sure we are fully happy with all the effects and stuff that we made with it. So let's maybe go bevel and emboss. I kind of do like how that looks just as it is right now. Let's say we increase the size a bit. Sort of adds a little gradient that I was going for, but not quite as intense. So I kind of do like that. I'm gonna go with the bevel and emboss, and yeah, I think this is good, definitely good for now. And there's not much to add to it. So we're gonna press OK, and now we're gonna go to the 3D sort of effect that I was talking about. So what we are gonna do is go to Control T. We're gonna press Control T, and now you hold down Alt and go to one of the corners. Sorry, you hold down Control and go to one of the corners of the transform. We're gonna click and drag, and what we are gonna do is basically we're gonna drag out the text to sort of give it a 3D effect. Now we can of course mess around with this like this, but you sort of want to think of, let's say there's like a focus of this title, like basically focused around a specific object in this thumbnail. So for now let's do like a random shape just as a placeholder. Let's say there's an image here that we really want to focus mainly on. Basically this is the focal point of the thumbnail. So let's, first of all, you always want to have text layers on the very top, because text is what people read. That is what you're drawn to first look at in a video. Of course, obviously images, visual cues are very important too, but you never want anything to obstruct text where people are just basically wondering what it's supposed to be saying. So now basically with this image here, we can basically work with this and work around it and have it sort of work well with the image and have like a 3D illusion. So what we are gonna do is, what we're doing now is actually Control, and then we're moving in one of the points, the bottom right in this case, and what this is doing here is giving this 3D illusion I was talking about. So maybe we want this text slant instead of like this, which is how the default is for this font. We actually are going to slant it the other way. Now we can of course do all this stuff in rotation, but stuff like this where you slant the text you cannot do. Now I sort of like how that's looking there, and now we can go Control T and actually rotate how we want. So I kind of like how that's looking. What we did is move the slant from the right side to the left side, because I feel like it works better in this sort of thumbnail. And then we also rotated it to how we want. And yeah, so I like how that's looking. And one thing we are going to do as well is make the text a bit wider by going Control T again and editing the transform and stretching it out a bit. Now this very corner for this image that we are focusing on is likely we aren't very focused on this very top left of the image. So it doesn't really matter if the text is overshadowing it a bit just on the top. If anything, I really love that sort of style where it doesn't necessarily need to be super linear and things are just mixed together very nicely. So let's view that at 10% again. And as you guys can see there, I think that looks perfect. The text is very clear. It's very crisp and clearly viewable from the smaller sizes. So let's even go 5%. Let's say that's quite small. But even from here, as you guys can see, the text is just perfectly visible. And that's one thing you really want to focus on when you are making thumbnails. You want to make things visible in smaller sizes, as I was mentioning earlier. Alright, so now I want to work with a practical example, something that you would probably be using in making a thumbnail, and a lot of the things that you'd be considering when creating a thumbnail out of content that you want to make a video out of. And in this instance, we're basically going to be making a thumbnail out of this weapon in Call of Duty World War II, which is, this weapon specifically is called the bar. Now, let's say we want to make a thumbnail for the bar, a weapon review or something like that. So the title would be something along the lines of bar weapon review, and then we'll have like the Call of Duty World War II logo implemented within the thumbnail somehow. And we basically want to have a focus around this specific weapon. Now this can of course be anything. Let's say you have a racing game where you want a specific focus on the video, like on a specific car or anything within a video, even like let's say a vlogs type of video where you want to focus on your face with a specific thing in the background. Then this is basically what we're gonna do now, focusing in on objects. And in this specific instance, we're basically going to be focusing in on this weapon. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut out this weapon itself from the background and make a duplicate version of the flat image itself in the backdrop. So basically, it might sound a little confusing now as I say it, but as we're going to do it now, you guys are going to get the hang of it. It's actually quite easy to make cutouts in Photoshop. And let's first of all let's duplicate this layer itself. So we're gonna right click on this screenshot of this in-game image, and we're gonna go to duplicate layer. Where is it at? There it is. Okay. So bar 2 copy. We're just gonna leave it at that for the name and have it duplicated. So we're gonna just disable the visibility on the layer below, and we are gonna disable everything else besides this this gradient, basically rectangle that we just made. So what we're gonna do now is enable it back, and we're gonna go zoom into this image. Let's go 500%. I think around, oh sorry, okay, something weird happened there, but we're gonna go 500%. Maybe that's a little too much zoom, so let's go like 250, half of that. There we go. So basically the reason why I did that is now you'll understand exactly why when we start using the lasso tool. And actually we're going to use the polygonal lasso tool. So instead of the lasso tool, we're going to right click up here. It's usually by default selected at just the plain lasso tool, but what we're going to do is right click that and then select polygonal lasso tool. So now what we're going to do is start by selecting the outsides of everything besides the arms and the weapon, and basically cut out the background. And so we're basically just not going to go too in detail here, but we're just going to do a basic selection of what we need to do. So let's say we want to cut out what we've done so far. So we can, let's say, just go out around the background and then connect the points and then press delete. Oh, okay, we need a rasterized layer. We can just simply do that quickly by selecting the eraser tool and then clicking wherever you want on the document, pressing delete, and there we go. So as you guys can see there in the background, what we have is a layer beneath it, which is this gradient that we just created instead of the actual game itself, the game background. So we're gonna keep on using the polygonal lasso tool and basically cut everything out from the background. Alright, so as you guys can see here now, I have made the full selection around the weapon itself, and let's actually zoom in a bit. Let's go 300%. As you guys can see, I basically made an outline with the polygonal lasso tool just all around the weapon itself, and we're just gonna cut out the full background now with one click. Bang! As you guys can see, we only have the weapon itself fully cut out with the background completely omitted. Now, we have two ways we can go about making this thumbnail now. What we can do, first of all, is use the background, use the duplicate layer beneath it and actually mess around with some blurs to actually make this a focus. Or we can use this Gaussian background that, sorry, not Gaussian. I keep on using the word Gaussian because that's mainly what we're going to be focusing on, a Gaussian blur when we're gonna be using this background, which I'm going to show you guys. We're going to dive deep into that, but we have one or two options. First of all, we can of course use this as the background and then mess around with text and make a full thumbnail using that, or we can actually use this background of the game itself. And that's the first thing I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to actually use. So first things first, let's say, first of all, let's actually make the text for the thumbnail itself. So let's say we want to call this BAR review. So let's make this a little bigger. So obviously the first line of the title, it's basically methods you want to figure out yourself, but I personally like to have bigger text on the top, and then the longer the text itself, the longer the word, you want the text to sort of squeeze it down and make it more compressed, as I'm going to show you guys right now. So let me finish typing review, and let's make it a bit smaller. Let's go with like a size 70 point for that. So let's rotate it, and let's get the text looking nice for this. So first of all, I just want the review to be slanted the same direction. So as I showed you guys, you just Control T and then press Control again and click and drag as you please. In this case, that looks good. And then we can obviously stretch out the text a bit. And I think that looks about right. So once we have that, let's also make the review the same sort of layer style. Now, let's say you applied a layer style to this text with the drop shadow, the outer stroke, and everything that you've done with this text. If you want to completely duplicate it without having to manually do it, you can right click on the first set of text that you want to copy the layer style. Right click and then copy layer style. There it is. And then right click on review, and let's paste layer style. So there it is, and bang, and as you guys can see there, it literally just copies the top and applies it to the bottom with all the effects and everything we did. So as you guys can see already, this is looking pretty nice. Let's view it at a smaller size. As you guys can see, that stands out pretty nicely. So let's go back to the 100% view, and now what we're gonna do is we have the top layer here, but we're not really focusing in on the weapon itself too much, because it is sort of just a normal screenshot right now. But what we can do is actually use this background image that we still have, because we of course duplicated before we made the cutout on the duplicate on the top. So what we are going to do is go on this background image, and we're going to go to filter and then blur and Gaussian blur. So as you guys can see here, this is quite an interesting effect that we can mess with. Now, if we go like, let's say a really high value for the Gaussian blur, it basically transforms this background screenshot of the game into a whole new image. Now, if we go to sort of like let's say like a 5 pixel radius, then we sort of have like a depth of field type of effect where we really have a focus on this weapon, but you can still distinctify the background as being a screenshot of the game. And I really like that effect. So we're going to go with 5. And as you guys can see, this already draws a lot more attention to the actual weapon itself, what this whole thumbnail is based around. This video is going to be based around this weapon, a review of this weapon in this game, right? This is just a very detailed, very specific instance of a thumbnail. Now, of course, this whole method I'm showing you guys can, of course, be used for a bunch of different types of thumbnails. This is, of course, a very focused one on this specifically, because this actually might be a video that I'm going to be doing. So this thumbnail that we're working on right now is one that I might actually use for the video that I'm going to be doing on this. So anyways, so let's actually resize this weapon itself before we continue and do anything else, because all the contents that you are focused on in the thumbnail, you always want to have a nice scale on them, because as I said before, everything is resized on YouTube. That all the thumbnails that we're going to be viewing are not going to be this exact size that we are seeing right now. So we want everything to be visible in smaller sizes. So we have, this actually looks pretty nice. It's kind of hard to determine the exact scale you want. That actually looks pretty good. I think that scale is almost right on. So we're gonna go with that scale we did manually. And before you guys go ahead and scale anything with the visual tool by just going Control T and then dragging out on one of the corners, make sure you hold down Shift so you constrain the proportions and basically retain the proportions and the ratio for the scale that the image originally had. So anyways, let's press the check mark, and as you guys can see there, we have a nice scale on the weapon itself. And there's a little issue here where this review is kind of overlapping over the, or basically this is overshadowing, overlapping the text itself, sort of clipping it a bit. So what we can do is actually, first of all, let's merge these two layers of this text. Let's go right click, and then actually let's not do that, because we might want to keep on editing the text later on if we do implement the this background. We'll go to that later, but let's just select these two, hold down Shift, and then go Control T. Whoops. Let's go Control T, and then let's hold down Shift so we constrain the proportions, and then bring it down to about that. I think that looks about good, and it's not really obstructing with this weapon model or the weapon image. And yeah, so it all looks good. And one thing we are gonna do now, before I go ahead and show you guys how to go about doing the gradient background. This is a very important thing, or how to use this image with a gradient background. This is a very important thing that you guys always want to do with focused images. Personally, what I love to do is go to effects and then blending options. One thing you always want to do, almost with anything you want to focus on, we did this with the text, is drop shadow. Drop shadow is a very, very, very important effect that I always like to focus on. And so now we have the drop shadow, and as you guys can see, that really draws a lot more focus and detail to this weapon. And just as it is right there, it looks good. But I really want to bring out the size a bit, or actually, if we bring it down, I sort of do like how that's looking. So one other thing we are gonna do is go to stroke, and then once we go to stroke, we are gonna go to overlay, or sorry, not overlay, rather screen. And what that just did is sort of added this nice little outside layer. Without a drop shadow, as you guys can see, you can't really see the stroke. With a drop shadow, you can see the detail to that. So we're actually going to go back to the drop shadow and bump up the opacity all the way to 100%. And now with the stroke, it looks a lot more visible. And let's actually, first of all, bring this layer all the way down, because this sort of obstructing with the text, you never want the text to be beneath. So first of all, let's bring the review down, or to the left itself. This is all the process of perfecting it and getting it right. It does of course take a while, and one thing I also want to do is go Control T and rotate this a little to the left, or to the right rather, and then bring it down. So it is even less obstructing with the text there, as you guys can see. And it adds a little more dynamicness to this thumbnail, if that makes sense. So I do like how that is looking. Let's continue with adding a little more effects before we go ahead and apply this. So let's go outer glow maybe. And now the thing is with outer glow, it is gonna overtake the sort of the drop shadow. So you have one or two options. You can go a drop shadow type of style, or you can go like an outer glow. Let's say we go let's say we later are gonna theme this text to be green. So let's go like a green outer glow. So let's maybe tone that down a bit. We'll make it like a lightish green. I think I like how that's looking. So let's bump up the size a bit, and then spread. Let's tone that a bit down. Yeah, I think that looks about right, around 10%. And then let's say with the stroke, we completely disregard what we did with the screen blend mode, and then we go to normal, and then we go to the color and pick around the same color we have the nearest to the stroke. With the outer glow, or actually let's rather just do that manually, and then we basically are just going to choose a green that would stand out with this green itself. This would probably be best with a light, really light yellowish green, maybe something like that. Now as you guys can see there, that looks pretty nice, and that really makes this the focus of this whole thumbnail, really makes it stand out a lot, with this darker outer glow and then a lighter variation of that color as a stroke. Now let's view that again as a smaller size. This is really how I like to do things. Viewing it at smaller sizes really gives you a nice perspective as to how this is going to look viewed in smaller sizes on YouTube. So I do like how that is looking. And what we can do, one other thing we can do is actually make the background. We can edit the colors of the background. Let's say we want to make it black and white. So we go on the bar and then we can, or sorry, not the bar, that's just the name of the layer itself. This, I believe, yes, it is the background. So we click on the background, let's go to image, adjustments, and then let's go hue and saturation, and let's bring we can first of all edit the hue quite a bit. We can make the hue, we can first of all colorize it and then bring the hue to like a green. Actually, that is probably the way you want to go. Let's maybe get it just about, that looks about right. So let's press OK, and then let's go to like a 30% or 20%. And yeah, as you guys can see already, that looks all really nice. And we didn't really do much. All we did is added an image effect by changing the hue and saturation, colorizing the background, and making it a greenish hue in the background, which sort of corresponds with what we did here with the outline of the weapon. Now, what we are also going to do to make this all match up together is edit the text. And what we are going to do, first of all, let's select one of the texts, and we're going to mess with that. So this is, I believe, yes, the bottom, which is the review text. And instead of the fill that we have now, which is just the plain white, we're going to go with gradient overlay. Now with the gradient overlay, first of all, what I'm going to do is select one of the presets here, which is the orange on the outsides and the yellow on the inside. And what that just did, it just applied that, but we don't really want those colors. So what we are going to do is edit the colors around a bit. And we're going to go with a nice sort of greenish on the bottom, and sort of looking to go a darker green on the bottom and then a very light green on the top. So maybe just around that looks just about right for what I'm going for. And then maybe let's go a lighter green here and then a white on the top. I'm not sure how that's gonna look. Actually, I love how that looks. That is probably how you want to go about this. Everything on the bottom should be the darkest and then lighter on the top. So that looks just about right. I really like how that looks. We're not going to go too much more in detail because I already showed you guys quite a bit of the effects, and I do like everything else except for like everything before that I didn't like. The only thing that I wanted to change was the fill, and all we did here was add the gradient. So that looks perfect. What we're going to do again is right click on that and then copy layer style and paste it on the top layer, the top text. So we're going to go to paste layer style, and as you guys can see there already, this is looking pretty nice. So let's go maybe view this in a smaller size again, just to get a better idea of how this is going to look smaller sizes. 20%, and that looks nice. So one other thing that we can do now before we continue on and do the color correction is we can, of course, always go back to the gradient background that we made. So the last thing we're gonna do in this tutorial, basically I showed you guys a lot of the fundamentals, and the last thing that is quite important in making thumbnails, we went through basically the theory and the logic of making thumbnails, the things that you want to think about, which is really important. I think one of the most valuable things I taught you guys in this video today. And we also saw how to make layer styles for the text, for images and whatnot. And the last thing we're going to do is actually focus on making color correction and the adjustment layers. So the first thing we're going to do is add a brightness and contrast editor on this image. And this is basically what you want to do. All these adjustments that we're going to do is the final touches of making a thumbnail. So first things first, we are going to go down here and click on that, on this little icon here, which is for adjustment layers. Click on that and then go to brightness and contrast. So now we added a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. With this, we can finally now edit the brightness and the contrast. So we're gonna tone down the brightness a bit and bump up the contrast. So what that just did is make the colors a bit more vibrant. And the thing is with this is that it sort of made the colors a much more darker and a little harder to see. And how we're gonna basically neutralize this is increase the exposure. So we're going to go down again to the adjustment layers, and we're going to go to exposure this time. We're going to bump up the exposure a bit, which is going to help make this a lot more bright and more vivid. For gamma correction, we're just going to leave that at 1. And yeah, so as you guys can see there, so far, without any adjustment layers, it just looks like that. Now, if we apply both, we have that. That looks a lot more vivid and a lot more depth to the colors. So one more adjustment layer that I added is called vibrance. Now with vibrance, I bumped up both the vibrance by +10 and the saturation by +10. And what that did is sort of add a little more, basically saturation to the colors. Again, adding more depth. So let's maybe view this again in a smaller size. As you guys can see, this is really looking like a nice thumbnail. So that's basically summarizes what I wanted to show you guys in this tutorial. It's not too in depth. I basically just wanted to show you guys the fundamentals of making a thumbnail. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this this video. I hope it helped you out. And again, if you have any other requests for different videos for Photoshop tutorials, then let me know down below. And again, as I said for around the 3rd time, hope you guys enjoyed, and leave a like if you did. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.